I'm Dave Laird,
I'm Matt Booker.
and welcome to Concavity Show.
Oh,
Well, hey Matt, we're here for episode 59 of the Great Concavity, and this is kind of a weird one-off episode that's more kind of like an announcement episode, I guess you could say.
that's right. And, we haven't been on recording for a while, so apologies for that. But we have been doing a lot of planning.
Yeah, it's been a couple few months of scheming since our episode with Chris Villa, and just really reflecting a lot on what the show has been, what the show might be, and thinking about sort of the future and next steps. Yeah, so we'll just kind of give sort of the exciting announcement here at the beginning, and then we'll just kind of discuss what led to this choice, and what it means, what it doesn't mean. And then at the end, if we have time, we'll talk about like what some cool stuff you've been doing and reading lately, and uh, give the people, what they usually come for, I guess. So we've kind of been like a big conversation that Matt and I have been having over the years is like, um, what is the identity of this show? Obviously, it's been a podcast totally dedicated to the discussion writing legacy of David Foster Wallace. At 5.5 years of doing the show, we're starting to feel like, okay, we've been interviewing a lot of writers, especially in the last year, with like Adam Levin and Jessica Anthony and um, a lot of others. And like, do we always want to talk about a writer that we're talking to in relation to this other guy, this other guy, Wallace, and always bringing the conversation back to Wallace? So, just grappling with that. And does it make sense to continue to always be a single author, single topic podcast? Obviously, we talk about books and by a million other writers and, Wallace adjacent stuff and contemporary American fiction, yada, yada. But we're sort of at a point, I guess, where we don't feel like we've exhausted the topic of David Foster Wallace. I don't think that's really possible. But we do just feel like maybe the space feels like we've said a lot, and we've talked to a lot of different people with not a lot of recurring guests, and maybe we want to go in kind of a not a hugely different direction, but like a slightly different direction, and almost like do a soft reset, I guess you could say.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's fair to say, and that really what we're doing now is going to reflect what we've been doing for a while now, maybe years now. And so we are slightly changing the name of the show from Great Concavity to Concavity Show, which has been our email and our social media handles already for a long time, but really just formally changing the name is slightly a signal to say that, we are evolving a bit as a show.
Yeah.
And I think that the evolution of any podcast is important. And this is something that a lot of other podcasts have struggled with in the past, is that once they get the format down, is that how do you not just become repetitive, right? And any show is this way, is that it becomes formulaic. How do you just not do the same thing over and over, and how do you expand it or grow? And I think what we initially learned is like we could have a lot of really interesting guests on the show. Mm-hmm. And I think that that is the really heart and soul of our show, is having different voices on, where we have very few shows where it's just you and me, Dave.
Yeah.
Like most of our episodes are us, getting to talk to someone new,
Yeah.
and to investigate who they are.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that's what we want to do more of. And so we want to signal that that's what really we're going to focus on. Mm-hmm. And I would also say that the show was started, without a lot of forethought. And that,
yeah, it was completely ad hoc,
and
it was very experimental at the start. Like, hey, do you want to try this thing and see
sure
if it works for us, and if like anyone listens to it, and if so, like cool. And then we just kind of went from there.
Sure, and I would say that it was actually a pretty good concept to begin with, and that anyone who wants to begin their own podcast now, which I would encourage anyone listening to try, but getting the concept right is key, right? And I think some of the best shows that I've enjoyed listening to are people who say, I am going to investigate X by doing Y. You know, I'm going to do this way. And they really have that concept worked out.
Yeah. Like Serial comes to mind for that. Like that's the
Well,
first
for
podcast I
sure.
ever listened to was Serial.
Sure. And actually, I wanted to ask you about that a little bit and talk about, what was the first podcast you ever loved? What do you like about podcasting? Because making this change has certainly made me reflect on that.
Yeah.
So you said Serial. Was that the first podcast you ever listened to, or the first one you ever loved?
Both, I guess. First one I ever listened to was like 2014 when we were living in Tel Aviv, and Rachel started listening to Serial, and it was like, the hotness. And I was like, podcasts, I don't know. And then she listened to it. It was like, this is great. You should listen to it. I was like, all right. So I just walk around Tel Aviv and listen to it in my headphones and got pretty hooked on it. And
This is season 1, the Adnan Sayan.
that's right. Yeah. And then after that, shortly after that, I hate to say Netrunner again for the 150th time on the show, but
Don't ever apologize for that.
a bunch of Netrunner podcasts. Like there was some guys in Vancouver doing one, there was some guys in the UK doing one, and they were so funny and like they're niche enough that it's like I have this really hyper specific interest area. I want to find other people who have that interest area and like dig it with them, And then after that, not a lot of other podcasts really. And then, this was like 2015 after shortly after the conference where we met. And I was like, oh, I keep searching in Apple Podcasts. Like there's no David Foster Wallace podcast. Like, when is that going to happen? And Rachel's like, well, why don't you just make it? And I was like, oh, yeah, right. And then I thought about it a little bit. And then I thought about, well, is that even viable? Is that too niche? Maybe that's too niche of a topic. And then I started brainstorming people I knew that I'd met at these last couple of conferences. And I instantly thought of you because we had a great 3-hour conversation in O'Hare on the way home, just bumped into each other. And then, so I just like pitched it to you in an email and you were like, yeah, let's just give it a shot and see what happens. How about you? What were your first ones that you fell in love with?
Well, it's funny because I think that, Serial came out in late 2014. And I remember it distinctly coming out because it was such a sensation. But I mean, I was into podcasts way before that. Not to brag, but like that was my thing. And the first podcast that I ever loved, that I really loved, was called Film Spotting. And I listened to this podcast in 2006, 2005. Like before that, I had a iPhone. Like the iPhone hadn't even come out.
Oh yeah.
And you had to sync your iPod, with iTunes and download episodes.
Yeah.
And
with a physical cable, right?
Right. Oh, for sure. And I remember I had heard about podcasts from my brother John. I got to give him credit because he got the first iPod in like October 2001.
Oh yeah.
And I remember he came to Manhattan and we went to TechServe. And he was telling me about some podcasts that he had downloaded and synced with his iPod, and I was just like, "That's some Star Trek shit, man!" Like I can't even relate to that. Like in 2001, I did not have a cell phone. I was still using the payphone. I could not even understand what he was talking about. But then, like I say, around 2005, I got a cell phone, moved to Austin. I got an iPod. And I started walking I got a dog, so I used to walk the dog a lot.
That'll do it.
And I would listen to all kinds of talk radio. And I mean, I remember loving This American Life before that. And Radio Lab came out around then, 2004, 2005. Mm-hmm. Somewhere around 2006, actually, my wife got a job working in radio.
Oh, yeah.
And I don't know if I ever talked about this on the show, but she worked... I don't know if I ever told you this story, Dave.
I don't think so.
Jordan worked for a a show called Earth and Sky here that was produced here in Austin, and it was about what's going on with astronomy. It was an astronomy podcast that was a daily show produced. I think it was like 2 minutes a day, and
Okay.
and it was syndicated though across all kinds of NPR shows across the country. 150 NPR stations carried this. It would be just like, here's a minute about astronomy, and then be like Earth and Sky, and they would just like go into like, what are the Pleiades doing? So she worked on like an astronomy podcast, and she got to go. I remember, I think in 2005, 2006, to like a podcasting conference, and brought home a bunch of CDs of like Radiolab and I would say different podcasts that a lot of them don't exist anymore.
Yeah.
But I got really into this show called Film Spotting, and it was hosted by three different guys, and they rotated. There was two main hosts, and then one of them kind of rotated out, brought in a new guy, and it was so intimate. Like, I felt like I knew these guys. I listened to them all the time, and they actually had really good ads, and they advertised for like this DVD service. I don't even remember the name of it, but it was like you could take old DVDs that you didn't watch anymore and print out like a piece of paper and fold the DVD and tape it into this piece of paper and mail it through the mail to trade with other people.
Oh yeah.
And it was so great. And like I did this all the time of like trading DVDs through the mail, and I just loved that podcast. And there was another one that I got to give a shout out to that was from a Wallace Lister, Hillary Brown. Hillary has been on Wallace L as long as I have, as long as I can remember. And Hillary is one of those people who I feel like I've known online forever, never met her. I'm sure she doesn't listen to this podcast, so I can talk about her. And her husband Jared, also super interesting dude, and they were like making podcasts with their friends back around this time, like 2005, 2006.
Wow.
And they were hilarious. Like I still remember like little skits and bits that they did from this like comedy show and just published online with their friends, and I felt like I was one of their friends, even though I didn't know them, they didn't know me, but I was listening to their like inside jokes every week, and I was like, this is freaking great. And
you feel like one of the cool kids when you're listening to it, right? Like you're in a secret club or something.
It was really that experience of going back now 15 years that I felt like it's just such an intimate medium. And this is what I wanted to ask you about, like what you like about podcasting, because to me that's the number one thing, is like the intimacy of the voices being in your head.
Yeah.
It's almost like getting to listen in on a phone call. I used to live in rural.
Essentially what it is.
It is, right? And it's like I used to live in rural East Texas where we had a party line telephone. Do you know what a party line is?
Yeah.
And like occasionally you pick up the phone and like there's people talking, and it's like it's just social mores that tell you this ain't your call, put the phone down.
Yeah, totally.
But as a kid you would just be like, I'm gonna fucking listen to this. I'm sure plenty of adults like got off on that, of just like, I'm just gonna listen to the phone call.
Yeah.
The other thing I would say is, so I actually thought about this a lot today, and the second thing I like about podcasts is the guests, right? We were able to bring on guests and meet people that we really want to talk to. Like you and I going back to that 2015 Jessica Anthony. I remember talking to you about, all kinds of people. We both love the Jim Gower book, and like you and I being able to talk about people and like, oh, I really am into this book, and then bring them on the show.
Yeah.
That's one of the best things that I like.
Yeah.
So the first thing that I really liked was the intimacy of the voices. Second thing was the bringing the guests, the people we talked to, Adam Levin, I guess, with the instructions. I remember you really liking that. And getting to talk to Adam Levin, I think, was one of the high points.
Oh, totally. Matt Luter texted me this morning and was like, hey, I just did a long drive. Listened to the Adam Levin episode. Really liked how you totally fanboyed to Adam for a while. I was like, yeah, I'm completely unabashed when it comes to that. If we have someone on whose work that I've loved for a long time, I have no qualms with like stroking their ego for a while and being like, this is how your work has been formative and meaningful for me. And that's completely fine.
Oh,
Um,
totally. And I would say the third thing that I love about podcasts in general and also making this show is being able to like practice what you preach. And, to be able to say, you know, everyone has a voice. You have one. I have one. Let's go out there and, try this experiment. It's sort of like the old days with blogs where like
yeah.
everyone had one, right?
Yeah.
And, you would get to know these different voices by reading their blogs. And I'm a big fan of that. Like, I think more people should do that. Like, I kind of hate that blogs don't really exist
Mm,
anymore.
yeah.
Um, and, the social media, I actually have a really love-hate relationship with. I wish that Facebook, Twitter didn't own every single aspect of what we publish
Yeah.
online.
Yeah, totally.
Instagram too. I mean, so those are some of the things. Is there anything else you want to mention about what you like about the format? I mean, I haven't even mentioned the reviews, and the feedback that we get is amazing.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah, I
another
think I
great
think
part.
the thing that would jump out to me the most is like the sense of community that develops around a podcast, or the community that's developed around our listeners with with each other online, that we like see conversations on Twitter and other places, but like just the sort of sense of uh like camaraderie and love, like total bibliophilia that exists, and like getting to meet listeners in person at Wallace conferences, or like if they're happen to be in my town, like once in a while I'll get a ping from somebody like, I'm going to be in your city, let's get a beer, and that's awesome. So that is a really cool thing, that like this can lead to actual real relationships in reality. And it's created some of my best friendships.
Oh,
Yeah.
totally.
So
And I totally get that too with,
mhm.
people who you see that they read the same books as you,
Yeah.
they watch a lot of the same movies as you do, listen to the same music,
Mhm.
and like those are your people. Why wouldn't you want to talk to them?
Yeah. Yeah,
And
exactly.
like I'm really fascinated with podcasts, especially that spring out of other like fan communities.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think a lot of those are really really interesting, and there's a lot to learn from other communities.
Mhm.
And you're a part of another big one with the Netrunner world,
Mhm.
and there's this whole other community, right?
Yeah.
But the fan group there, um, I'm sure it's a little different, but in a lot of ways, I'm sure that it's the same.
Yeah, totally.
Um,
There's so many parallels that you could draw between any kind of like really ridiculously hyper specific subculture like this.
so we had this thing going on the Wallace list, and I mean the Wallace list is really like where I come from as a fan,
Yeah.
and that's something that amazingly still exists and has existed for over 20 years, and I've been involved in it uh, almost the whole time of its existence. And there was a thing about outgrowing DFW this week or
Yep.
last week,
Yeah,
and
that article came out like a year or two ago, I think, and I remember
maybe even
reading it.
3 years ago,
Yeah,
like 3 years
it's
ago.
yeah.
But I wanted to bring it up because I think for me, that it definitely pushed some buttons of mine that I feel like there are a group of people, like I was mentioning with Hillary and stuff, people that I've known for 20 years.
Hmm.
And I would put, people like Brandon Hobson in there,
Hmm.
um, George Carr, Marcel
Yeah.
Molina,
Hmm.
Mark Bronner, um, Prabhakar. I mean, there's so many people that I could name, that Maria
Maria, yeah, I was
Bustillos
gonna say. Yeah.
are in that group, that, it's people that I've known for 20 plus years.
Mhm.
And shout out if I didn't mention you, I love you. They're my people. But then there's a whole nother generation of people came along later, right?
Yeah.
20 after 2008.
Yeah.
And even 2008 seems like a distant memory in a
Hmm.
lot of ways. And there's people that came along past few years. and there's new people coming along all the time. But one thing that those people have in common, I feel like, is they're all interested in a lot of different other things.
Yeah,
And that if you were
totally.
to sit down with any of those people that I just named right now,
Mhm.
you could have really great conversation about current events, about music, about films,
Yeah.
about any kind of media, art, and it would not just be limited to David Foster Wallace.
Yeah, exactly. And I think probably like if someone did an analysis over last 58 episodes and like logged what percentage of the time we actually talked about only Wallace versus any other subject, it would probably be a pretty small amount,
Right.
or like less than half, I would say. Um,
Right. And so for two things there, one is the world of books has always interested me, from going back
mhm.
20 years ago when I worked in book publishing. And I still feel like that's a sort of natural home for me. There's so many books that get published every year, and most of them, the majority of them, do not get enough attention. And that's one thing that our show can do, is to bring attention to something that deserves it.
Mhm.
And
Yeah,
I
totally.
was talking to you about this earlier, of like, this experience of publishing in this current day and age really sucks in a lot of ways, because you publish something, you tweet out a link for a day, couple
Yeah,
days,
yeah,
it gets like 10 likes, and then within the few minutes the whole world has moved on, you
yeah.
know and it just, that's so anticlimactic. And I feel like one thing that our show can do is to try to keep some conversations going,
Mhm.
and actually feel like the conversation about Infinite Jest is important to keep going, like, forever. It's like, to
Totally.
me, like Ulysses, like, you know, I mean, Hemingway, I would put, David Markson, Under the Volcano. There's a lot of books to me that are important that
Mhm.
you could just keep talking about pretty much forever.
Yeah.
And that new people discover them, and the whole world shouldn't move on.
Yeah.
Um, but the other thing I wanted to ask you about, Dave, was, the reality we're in right now, which is COVID. And
Yeah.
last year we canceled the Wallace conference.
Yeah.
You and I have not met up since Austin in 2019,
Yeah, almost 2 years now. Yep.
coming up on 2 years, and it's probably going to be at least another year or two before you and
Yeah.
I meet up.
Yeah, probably a year.
Do you want to explain why partly that is?
Um, why we won't meet up for another year?
Well,
Because
because
the Wallace 2022 conference is being in Austin next year. Is that what you mean?
baby Dave Laird 2.0.
Oh, yeah, sure. Okay, we're expecting our second child in September. Yeah, for sure. So that'll kind of derail my ability to travel for a while, which is cool. Like I'm willing to make that sacrifice, obviously.
Baby Laird 3.0 maybe coming up
No,
2022.
there's no plan for that
Uh,
ever. Two's the cap. Um, yeah.
but yeah,
Um,
that just travel in general has been
yeah.
difficult
Fraught.
out of the US.
Yeah. And there's just really not a lot happening like on the Wallace front because of that. And even like one thing we've noticed is we're trying to get like, ARC's review copies of some of the more recent academic monographs that have been coming out in the last year or so. And like when we query some publishers, like we don't get anything back from them, which is like really different from the way like Bloomsbury has treated us in the last 5 years, which was like we had this contact, she'd be like, yes, great, what else do you want, what else can I send you? And now it's like we can't even get responses from these places, which I assume like has to do with the tightness of what COVID has done to the publishing industry, I'm sure, right? And so it
Yeah, and
feels like
I
in a
just
way
can't
like
read. I mean,
yeah,
I don't know about you, but I cannot read a fucking PDF on the screen.
no, I just no,
Like, as a book, that to
totally
me is not the same experience as like
no,
laying in bed and having something
yeah,
you can write in the margins of, and putting
yeah.
your pencil in it, and
Yeah, I
skimming
just
it
can't look at
through.
a screen reading for that
Yeah,
long. Yeah,
me
it's
too.
it's like totally like I say this to my high school students a lot, like you have to give your reader like a visual break,
Yeah,
like if you get a wall of text and there's no paragraph breaks, like you have to ease the visual burden on the reader by using like these natural organizational pauses with paragraphs. I feel like reading a PDF of like a monograph like doesn't even though it has paragraph breaks, obviously, it's like there's no visual break. That's a weird comparison,
I
but
mean,
yeah,
no, I feel the complete same way. It's just it's really two different experiences. Like
yeah,
you're in front of a screen or you're in front of a book.
yeah.
And
And you
they're
and I both look at our computer for like 9 hours a day for work. So like, I don't
yeah,
want to do that in my free time
totally,
unless it's like something really fun, like a video game or movie or TV.
totally. So that is, one complication right now. I think it's changing as we speak. There are more opportunities to get printed books in front of us, um, and to interview more people who get that their work isn't represented as best on a screen, but on a piece of paper. So, I'm excited about that, but I also think um, 2022 will be great whenever we do have conference back here in Austin. Um, we were not able to have the Wallace conference in 2020 for obvious reasons. 2021 is still a bit up in the air, but there is a
Yeah, Amsterdam.
conference scheduled for Amsterdam in October.
Yeah.
Um, I think it's unlikely that I will be there, or few people that we know will be there.
Yeah, I definitely will not be making that
Um,
with the new infant.
so there will be, like I say, a lot of expectation and hopes and planning and just
Yeah.
fun around being in Austin in early June of 2022. And, anyone listening is invited. There will be more details coming up soon, but it'll be first weekend in June of 2022 here in Austin at the Ransom Center, University of Texas. We have a lot of great partners eager to renew their partnership with us, and we will have some version of a podcast, either live or asynchronous, from there. And I think it
Totally.
will be an exciting time. But
Hmm.
between now and then, and really going forward, I feel like you and I still want to do this show. We still want to talk about this. I'm still interested in the world of books.
Hmm.
And like I said, there's so many that are published that just don't get enough attention that I think, we want to try to bring even a small amount of attention
Yeah,
to.
totally.
Uh,
With our millions of listeners.
I wouldn't say millions, but it's no small thing. Like, we're into the thousands of
I'm joking.
listeners. We're into
Yeah,
the
a couple of
thousands.
thousand seems about pretty consistent, I would say.
And do
Yeah,
you want to give a kind of a rundown of what this change means or doesn't mean, or what's not
yeah,
changing?
for sure. One more thing I'd add about why we're sort of choosing a slightly new direction is that the number one piece of feedback I think that we seem to be getting from people who write into us on our email is that they just love hearing about all the new book recommendations and authors on our show that we talk about and that they maybe haven't heard of before. That like they feel like they're increasing their depth as readers, always adding fresh books and authors to their stack. And like I would say that that's super true for me, just talking to you, Matt,
Yeah.
and to like people like Mike Miley and millions of other guests that we've had. Where I'm just like, I haven't heard of any of these writers that you're talking about, and then I just add them to the list. And so it's a very expanding experience for me to do this show, and I feel like I've grown a lot as a reader as well. So seeing that all the time coming in with emails, it's always like, okay, have you guys read this? Have you read this? And we'll be like yes or no, and then we'll bounce back with some other titles, and we end up having this great conversation with a lot of listeners about like just what we're reading, what we're listening to, watching, and those conversations are like never really have that much to do with Wallace specifically. Quite often, sometimes we get a very specific Wallace related, email or something, but like we're starting to just get the sense that like maybe we don't have to be so limited in our topic, and we can sort of expand into the world of contemporary literary fiction in a less pigeonholed kind of way, I guess.
Well, and I think I've told this story before, but this is really how the Wallace list, the email list, was
Yeah,
started.
yeah,
Was
out
that
of Pynchon, right?
right? And it's just that the people who read one thing, they can't get enough of this other thing, and so they're always looking for like, what is something else like this? And
Yeah,
that's true of
totally.
podcasting too.
Yeah.
But it's very true of the people who are drawn to a book like Infinite Jest and say, okay, I've read this, I've read Gravity's Rainbow, I've read,
Mhm.
Underworld by Dante Lillo. Like, what is some other
What else
stuff?
is like this? Yeah.
Right. What are you guys reading? And it's like,
Yeah.
there's another group of people who can just say like, oh, you need to go read, Sergio de la Pava and
Yeah. Bolaño and
novel explosives and
yeah.
give you a long list.
Yeah.
And then I would say what's really interesting to me is there's another group of people who are like, okay, after you've read all of that shit, there's another list that's that's like here, and
Yeah.
it's like, not just the recognitions and Joseph McElroy, but it's stuff that's like none of you have ever heard of. And then there's another list on top of that that's like
Yeah.
those people are like, no, go back and read this.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and to me
There's like
that's
Masonic depth to the world of books in a way,
that's
like layers of more advanced Gnosticism in a way, like
right.
secret higher knowledge.
So, we have not talked about Freemasonry much on this show, Dave, but I am you're speaking to a 32nd degree Mason myself, um, through the Scottish Rite, which,
Yeah, that was part of my reference.
all right, we're not going to get too much into that right now, but in general, with music, the similar, I think, analogy works with like independent versus like
Yeah,
mainstream music.
sure. Yeah.
And there's much more hipsterism around like,
Oh yeah.
oh, well, I like this band. I'm sure you never heard of them. And
Yeah.
to me, that's like exemplified by Dave Laird, who's like, Dave is able to say like, oh, well, I'm sure you haven't heard of these like 10, British Columbian bands.
Yeah.
And
I
no,
mean,
I
a lot of
haven't.
that stuff's just really regional, right?
Right. But
Yeah,
I think the same can be true for books.
totally.
And the people who are really into that shit, that like people or books that you've never heard of, other people have never heard of, even well-read people,
Hmm.
that's interesting to me.
Totally. Yeah.
And I think that that's way more interesting to me as a listener rather than just going through like, what did Random House and Penguin and Simon and Schuster publish this year. um no offense, but like we want to go even beyond what some obscure booksellers and bookstores bring to mind, and stuff you're not going to find in a bookstore, period.
Yeah, I think
So
that can definitely be true.
so again, I think that a lot of the people who share the same tastes in Wallace, um, as a writer, would be interested in stuff like that.
Hmm.
um, so there's a lot of opportunity for us to really explore some of those writers that we
Yeah.
have not, maybe we've read or have read together, but we've not brought onto the show.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so to your question, what this means, what this, slight name change, you'll also have noticed probably that our logo has changed. Chris Ayers has designed this new logo for us, which was a really hard challenge for me because I love Robin's drawing so much. That's been our logo, and Robin has been such a formative person in the development of this show and ongoingly. And like listening to me reading stuff as much as I have over the last 6 years, contiguous with our show, like it has just been really meaningful to me that she's been, a piece of this. And so changing it was mainly just to signify like we are, sort of rebranding a little bit here, going in a, I hate the word branding, but we're going in a slightly different direction. And so that's one of the things that this change means. But really, like I think if you were to say what is our podcast about going forward, I think it's just basically like we are just going to continue the ongoing discussion of contemporary, American and world fiction with more interviews with writers and creative folks and other cool stuff that like really interests us in the world of literary and pop culture. I think is really sort of, which is mostly what the show has been, with just maybe a bit of a hyper focus
With
some
that
of the
too,
time.
mentioning Robin's artwork, which was key to us, and
Mhm.
her being one of the first guests. And, for people who haven't listened to that episode one, I would say just Google Robin O'Neill,
Yep.
ROBYNO''Neil,
Yep.
and look at her artwork. Go read some interviews with her. And she's a major American artist, and
Mhm.
I'm super proud of any affiliation between
Yep.
our little show and her,
Yeah. I was a huge
because
fan of hers for years and years before we started doing this.
and
Yeah.
you were, and really you are the one that pushed to use her artwork for our show, and like I really love
Mhm.
um everything that we have got to even see from her, and listen to her show.
Yeah.
And that brings me into a little bit of the thank you part of this episode, which is like not just thank you to Robin, but like thank you for everyone who has hung in with us for almost 6 years of us doing
Yeah.
this show.
Totally.
And the people, especially, I want to give a shout out, and I want to ask you to give a bunch of shout outs after this, but like the people who have who I am really appreciative of, people who have emailed us,
Mhm.
people who have listened to an episode and said, hey, I'm just going to send you guys an email at concavityshow@gmail.com. Every single one of those emails is like just absolute treasure to me. And like
Yeah.
I say, I've never gotten any other feedback like this in my life.
Mhm.
And it really does mean a lot. And so, like, everyone who's taken the time to send one of those emails, like,
Yeah.
I want to say thank you to.
Yeah.
It's really made me feel like that we are part of a community here.
Yeah. Yeah.
And, I don't know, I'm just very grateful.
Yeah. I feel it totally.
And the people who
Yeah.
have given money through our Patreon, like, I'm super
Yes.
grateful for that.
Yeah. That is another
Um,
feeling of like radical affirmation, human
Empathy,
attestation.
support.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like I like what you're doing enough consistently that I'm just gonna like give you money.
Well,
Like wow. That's
well,
really
and I have to say I have done that with some people who I really just want to support as well. But also the people who have left reviews on Apple Podcasts and like written reviews for the
yeah.
show.
Totally.
Like those people are absolute saints in my opinion. And um, there's so much positivity we've gotten from people. Um, it's asking a lot to ask you to go even find how to do that, to write a review on Apple Podcasts.
Yeah.
And then the people who have done it, it's just, it's really stunning to me that the number of really great, encouraging um,
Mhm.
reviews that we've gotten those people. It's just
Yeah.
so great. So thank
Yeah.
thank you to those people.
Totally.
Who else, Dave? Parquet
Uh,
Courts. I'll say
oh yeah.
Parquet
We're
Courts.
obviously keeping that. That's not going anywhere as far as we're planning. Um yeah, people who have just come up to us at conferences and been like, "Hey, I'm this person. You've never met me. I've never written in, but like I've listened to your show and thank you so much." And like it is so cool to like meet somebody who's listened to everything we've ever put out and like we didn't know they existed until now, kind of a
Yep.
thing. Um, and just people like coming up to us and saying that is incredibly meaningful and life affirming for sure.
And it's actually happened to me a couple times at the Ransom Center as
Yeah,
well.
has it? Cool.
And I've actually, now that you say that, I realize like our podcast has existed longer than the society has. And, I think part of the reason why, we wanted to create the society is to keep that sense of community going outside of the
The
conferences,
conferences, yeah,
right?
totally.
And so that sense of people who would say, oh, I can't travel there, but I'm listening to you
Hmm.
in this foreign country. And
Yeah.
the society, we've got something like 30 different countries of people who've joined, maybe even more, 40 different countries.
Yeah.
And to get the same kind of response of people who listen to the show all over the world is really stunning to me. And it really does make me feel like we're at a pub somewhere. Like it
Yeah.
could be in Malaysia, it could be in Australia, it could be in Israel or wherever, like in
Mhm.
South Africa, and like we could have the same kind of conversations around a couple of pints, and
Yeah,
that's exciting to me.
totally. I agree. Yeah.
So what else? We're a Concavity show now. We are going to make some new merch at some point.
Yeah, so like this also means that like we still are gonna have the same website, the same social media accounts, Patreon, podcast subscription feed won't change. So you don't have to make any changes on your end, dear listener. It's still gonna come through. It's just gonna have a slightly different name and a different logo. But like all the banter, all the gags, all the uproarious humor and continuity that you've come to love and expect from us.
No, no more gags from me. Sorry, no more
Yeah, Matt
gags.
is Matt is going serious here on out.
Yeah,
So
that's
yeah.
it. That's
But
it for
yeah,
me.
I just kind of feel like the analogy came to me kind of recently of like Eric Clipperton in Infinite Jest of like running around the tennis court with a gun to his head and just like he has to win, otherwise it's curtains. And like in a very small way for us, like we always have to bring the conversation back to Wallace because that's like the title of the show, and we're just kind of like beholden to this thing, and maybe we can just put that down a little bit and broaden our tennis game, you know what I mean? um and that kind of leads me into the question of what this doesn't mean, this sort of slight change. And what this doesn't mean is that we're never going to talk about Wallace again, or even have like Wallace specific episodes again in the future, because I definitely think we will. I think it's very likely, possible. You mentioned like we might do a live episode from the Wallace conference next year, and obviously that's going to be some high octane Wallace content. So it doesn't mean that we're not still, highly interested in Wallace studies, in the monographs that are continually being put out on Wallace, the community that's developed around his work and the show and all that stuff. Obviously, you mentioned we're both still on the society. You're working vigorously towards the Austin conference next year in 2022. You still run the Wallace listserv. We're obviously both going to go to every Wallace conference that we can in the future. So there's no changes in like our interest areas for sure.
Well, and right now I'm the managing editor of the journal, and
Also, though, yeah, for
uh,
sure. So
and
so that work
also
will continue.
do a lot of the pretty much all of the fulfillment of the orders of the journal. So if you want
Mm,
a copy of issue number 3 of our Journal of David Foster Wallace Studies,
mm.
yes, we do have new merch. We have new coasters and stickers that say Journal of David Foster Wallace Studies. And we've actually got like issue 4 is in good shape, and we've got issue 5 and 6, and like there's a long future of David Foster Wallace studies, and we want to talk
Yeah.
to as many of those people as possible. But what we were saying earlier, like the people that we have on are interesting people, and we want to be able to follow our own interests as well, when it comes to books especially.
Mhm.
And I would say this change is really reaffirming what we've always been, which is a books podcast,
Yeah.
and that we talk about literature because that's, for me, that's like my first love. And I'm still interested in the world of books. I really want to stay engaged with it in every way that I can.
Mhm.
And this is a way for us to explore that a bit more.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I mean, it doesn't mean that we're not interested in talking about Wallace in like emails still, in our social media stuff. Like we will still, post, repost, whatever, current Wallace related news and articles and scholarship, and always happy to keep that kind of a conversation going with folks for sure. Um, yeah. So
So, anything else about the relaunch you want to talk about with the name, before we talk a little bit about what we're doing right now, and then we can wrap things up a bit?
yeah, I guess so. Some exciting new things to sort of celebrate here with this like soft reset is, as we mentioned, a new, slightly different name to sort of. So the Great Concavity is a very specific reference to Wallace in Infinite Jest, right? So Concavity shows like there's still a vestige of that, but it's not quite the whole mouthful. So as part of our sort of soft reset here, we've been talking about reworking some of our Patreon tiers as well. We're thinking of adding probably a $5 tier in which we offer bonus content. So like post show discussions, and what we're thinking of for that is that we're going to talk to each of our guests about what their top 5 books of all time are. So to really get at like, here are the grand favorites. So we'll offer that at the $5 tier, and we're gonna try and work with some kind of online store that does, you know, like shirts and mugs and all kinds of paraphernalia that you can have our new logo on from Chris Ayres. And we'll offer discounts to certain Patreon tiers and things like that. So stay tuned for that. We'll have more on that in other channels later. But exciting things at work there. Tiers 1 and 2 will probably remain the same. Tier 3 we might alter slightly. We've kind of found that the merch send out thing is like actually a lot more expensive than we originally thought because of international postage. Stuff within the US is fine, but then like sending stuff abroad is quite expensive. So
We'll still do some down the road, but
yeah,
you know, if you have ideas on this too of what you want,
yeah,
um,
totally. We'd love to hear from you on
you
this.
know, there's a lot that we haven't done, Dave. I think some other possibilities are things like um, Instagram Live and bonus
Mm-hmm.
content stuff. That's
Yeah,
um, but again, if you just subscribe to the podcast and listen to us on the reg, you will not miss a thing. Like you will be
yeah,
happy
yeah.
here listening to us. We're hoping, I would love to do like one new thing a month. I know we've been a little bit
Yeah,
irregular, but
yeah.
we are trying to be a little more regular in the future. And I think that this gives us a lot of more freedom to do that.
I think so too. Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
More to come. Follow us on Twitter and Instagram for that updates. I would
Yeah.
say before we leave today, Dave, do you want to talk a bit about what you've been reading, watching, etc.?
Yeah. Let me get my list. So right now I'm reading The Last Samurai by Helen DeWitt, which is a book that came up in an email from a listener. They were like, "Hey, have you guys read this?" And I was like, "I've never heard of this." And then they talked about it a bit, and it sounded cool. And so I've been reading it. I'm almost done. I was actually hoping to finish today, but I didn't get a chance. It's about kind of a like child prodigy who's learned like dozens and dozens of languages by the time they're 5, including like ancient Greek. And it's like reading Homer and the Iliad, the Odyssey in original Greek. And kind of contiguous to that, they're also like a math genius. And then in like a personal level, they're trying to like find their father because they don't really know who their father is. And they end up just talking to all of these like geniuses who they think their father might be. So that's been a cool book. I like it quite a bit. There's a lot of linguistic stuff. Obviously, the film The Last Samurai factors heavily into it, which makes
Not
me
not the Tom Cruise film.
not the Tom Cruise film. That's right. The like black and white Japanese film.
Right.
Yeah. Seven Samurai specifically. Yeah. I read Red Pill by Hari Kunzru recently. Which was your favorite book, I think, was it last
Right.
year in our
Yeah.
end of year review?
Yeah. Yeah. I
That
recommended
that
that.
was quite a cool book. I've read a couple Brandon Hobson novels, Where the Dead Sit Talking and The Removed, both of which I really adored. They're great. Drive Your Plow Over the Bones of the Dead by Olga Tokarczuk is something I read recently, which really like you cannot name a book a better title than that, in my opinion. It is the most metal, face melting, captivating book name
Did you
I've,
finish that
I've
book?
ever
Did you
seen.
like
Oh
it?
yeah, I
Yeah.
did. I did. I liked it a lot. We can talk about these more in depth, you know, in our year in review episodes. But yeah, I thought it was quite good. Um, Jessica Anthony, when she was on our show, she recommended Deb Olin Unferth, who's an Austin writer, and I read Barn 8 by her recently, and I thought that was fantastic. I read Intimations by Zadie Smith, that really short
Super
little essay
short.
collection. I read it in like an hour. It
Yep.
was like a great way to spend an hour. A lot of reflections on like the COVID year, the lockdown year. Adam Levin recommended to us The Organs of Sense by Adam Ehrlich Sachs, which I read like a couple months ago, and it is a fascinating and very funny and cool little book, really about astronomy, and I thought that was great. Forgotten Work by Jason Gurriel, who's a Canadian writer, is something I came across recently. Mutual friends recommended it. It's a like an epic prose poem
Also
about,
read this book.
yeah, it's pretty great, huh?
Yeah, it's bananas.
An epic prose poem that's like set in a kind of a future, maybe 40, 30 years in the future, about a band who recorded some music that is like so obscure by this later point that there's just become a really obsessed fan community with trying to find these lost recordings of this band.
It's
So
all
this,
written in like heroic couplets.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's unreal. So I thoroughly enjoyed that. I got to Saunders' new book, Swim in the Pond in the Rain, about the 8 Russian short stories. Um, I've got 4 more to list of what I've read this year, and then you can go.
What else? What else? What else?
I finished The Underground Railroad by Colson Whitehead this year, which I previously had started a couple of years ago, and for whatever reason I left it, and then I decided to come back to it, which I'm really glad I did because it was great. And also the Amazon Prime show just came out
Right.
last week of it, so I've watched the first episode. Thought it was extremely moving, and the cinematography is glorious. And like very close to that, I read The Water Dancer by Ta-Nehisi Coates, and I loved that too. Both really interesting takes on the saga of slavery in the US. And like The Water Dancer is a very magical realist bent to it. And The Underground Railroad isn't quite magical realist, but it almost is. Like it's revisionist in a way, where the Underground Railroad is a literal railroad underground throughout the US. So it's not necessarily like that. That could have been physically possible, I guess. Not very likely, but like there's nothing magical about it. But that they both play with these historical situations in a way that is, I thought, pretty cool. And I liked Lean on Pete by Willie Vlautin. Great little book that you bought for me when I was in Austin 2 years ago. He's got a new one coming out that I'm very excited for. And I read The Death of Vivek Oji by Akwaeke Emezi. They're a pretty phenomenal writer. They're getting a lot of traction. They're on the cover of Time magazine most recently. So if you haven't read Akwaeke Emezi, I recommend them. Freshwater, most specifically, I really like Freshwater a couple of years ago. And the last one I read this year was I Hotel by Karen Tai Yamashita, which is pretty big, pretty long. I like some aspects of it, but I'm not sure the payoff is quite what I was hoping for in that 600 or so pages. But I think you have that on the shelf, Matt.
Yeah.
Future possible read.
I've never finished it. I got bogged down
Yeah.
in the I Hotel. I really like her Tropic of Orange, which is another book of hers. But
Okay.
yeah, I have a few things that I've finished recently, and then a few things that I have in process right now. So yeah, I finished probably a few books recently that you've kind of mentioned. One is the new Willie Vlautin book, who I absolutely love. I love him. His new book's called The Night Always Comes. I highly recommend it. It's set in Portland, Oregon, and it's about a poor woman who's struggling to make ends meet. And the whole book takes place in about a day or two, and it's fantastically plotted. I highly recommend it. I think he's just a really great realist, and
his storytelling is great. Like his
yeah,
prose is really like straightforward.
yeah,
Like it kind of reminds me of Cormac McCarthy in a way, where it's just like pretty like concrete sentences, but like short sentences. There's something really addictive about his storytelling style.
yeah. I mean, you can tell that like with both of those writers that they go over, and maybe even DeLillo too, that they go over their work a lot. And I would actually put Brandon Hobson in that group too.
Yes.
And that, I've gone back and read all of Brandon's work again in the past few months, including his first book, which I really love, called Deep Ellum. And Deep Ellum is a neighborhood in Dallas, which is like the cool, hip neighborhood, but it's pretty bleak in Brandon's first book. And what I love about that book is it's one of those books where not a lot happens plot wise. It's like just a guy kind of roaming around, you live through his thoughts. And I absolutely love books and movies like that, where it's like not a lot's going on plot wise. It's a character driven
Yeah.
thing. It's a character book.
That's really like the distinction of like what separates literary fiction from, popular fiction. I
It
really
could
like.
be. I feel like that's one distinction for sure.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
Mhm.
and on that same note, as I read this little short book in the past couple of months called Mona by an Argentinian writer named Paula Olixirac. I don't even know how to say her last name. Olixirac, Olioshirak.
Mhm.
Pola, it's Olixarac. Anyways, she's an incredible writer. I got her first book called Savage Theories. Mona is a very short book, and it's about a writer going to kind of a literary retreat in Sweden. So it's
Oh
almost
yeah.
like
Red Pill.
midsummer, right? It's summer,
Yeah.
but like there's some
The film.
crazy shit that goes on.
Oh yeah.
Um, and I really like that book. You could read it in like 2 days, maybe max like a day.
Mhm.
It's a very short book. Really love that book. Um, I also reread a book that I first got maybe last year or the year before, and I haven't talked about much on the show, but I really love this book called Loop by Brenda Lozano. And I think I
Mhm.
mentioned it to you. It was published in Mexico in like 2014, 2015 under the title Cuaderno Ideal, which is like ideal notebook. And
Hmm.
I think that's a much better title than Loop. But
Sure.
Charco Press out of Scotland published it, I think in 2019, and I read it in 2019 and then just reread it again this past month. And it's a fantastic kind of fragmentary novel. And if you're really into stationery, which I am, you would love this book. But also, if you're, it's also kind of a retelling of the Odyssey
Oh yeah.
from the woman's point of view, right? Of like waiting while your like lover is far away and waiting for him to return.
Mhm.
Um, and there are a lot of loops built into it. It's all set in Mexico City, which I
Cool.
have this like long-term abiding fascination with Mexico.
Oh, Mexico City is
Um,
glorious.
uh,
What a great place.
we'll get more to that later, but
Okay.
I I also Brenda is a contributing editor at Ugly Duckling Press,
Mhm.
and they just came out with a book that I am over the moon about called M/W by a writer named Matt Longabuco. And this book is an long form essay about the movie The Mother and the Whore, directed by Jean Eustache, La Mama et la Poutine. And this is one of my all time favorite movies. It's 3.5 hours long, almost 4 hour long movie. It's 1973, I think, takes place in Paris, is black and white.
Mhm.
And it's absolutely riveting. It sounds crazy, but it's a dialogue driven movie, character driven movie. And there's not much critical work on it. It's actually hard to find this movie.
Mhm. Mhm.
And Matt Longabuco, this book just came out, I think, last month in the US called M/W, which is slightly a take on the Roland Barthes book S/Z. You know that book?
Okay.
Um, and The Mother and the Whore, M/W. He's kind of
Mhm.
doing this takeoff on that. It's a really well written, interesting book,
Hmm.
super short. I've also started uh, Derek Delgadio's memoir called A Moral Man. Derek Delgadio is kind of
Is it
this
a moral man or a moral man? Like, is
all
there a
one word,
space? Okay.
no, all one word, A Moral
So,
Man.
okay, yeah.
And
No
he,
morality, that guy.
that's, I mean, that's up for debate, right? But he's got this special on Hulu. So I watched the special on Hulu, and it's fascinating. And he's actually a really good writer, part of which takes place in Colorado Springs, where I lived for a while. So I was very interested in that.
Mhm.
How does someone become a sleight of hand magician in this day and age?
Mhm.
He kind of gives you his backstory. It's very well written. It's got amazing blurbs. Jelani Cobb, go read it. I would highly recommend that.
Mhm.
Um, I think I have three other things to talk about, and then we'll move on. Setting you up, three things.
Wait for it. Wait for it.
One is the book that I got from Library of America recently. I
Mhm.
subscribed. I think I talked about this last year during COVID. Subscribe to the Library of America, get their books. And it's by an American writer I've never read. Very exciting, named Ann Petrie. Have you ever heard of her?
I don't think
I
so.
think maybe I sent you a text about this.
Mm.
She has a two volume or two books set. One book called The Street, one novel called The Narrows.
Mm.
And I think The Narrows is considered her masterpiece, but The Street is her debut novel. It came out in the late 1930s. And it's about like a single black mother living in Harlem in the late 1930s. And it's a very realistic, extremely well written, um, highbrow literature, but yet you're able to read it. I would put it like with Invisible Man, Black Boy,
Oh yeah.
Richard Wright.
Yeah.
It's like that. Um, and I'm really into it. The Street. I haven't
Cool.
read The Narrows yet. It's in the same book. Um, the other exciting thing, penultimate, I want to mention is
Mhm.
the Galley. I just started reading of Kyle Beachy's new book.
Oh yeah. I got
Most
that in
fun
the mail
thing.
too.
Most
I'm
fun
so
thing,
excited to read that. Yeah.
dude. I'm like 100 pages into this book, and
Oh,
I'm
good.
just fucking fascinated by this book. And it's
Yeah.
so mature. It's called The Most Fun Thing. It's mostly about skateboarding,
Yeah.
but a lot of it is really just about like growing up in the 80s and
Mm-hmm.
what skateboarding culture symbolized, what it was like, what
Yeah.
it's like now,
Mhm.
for a guy in his 40s. And Kyle's a friend of the show. He's been on
Yeah.
the show before. I'm sure we'll have him back to talk about this book.
Yeah, for sure.
um,
I was
and
thinking that too.
it is such a great um, distillation of who he is as a writer, as a person.
Mhm.
And I think the book comes out soon. It'll probably be out by the
Yeah, it's in
time
August.
people
Yeah.
hear this. But it's called The Most Fun Thing. And
Which is also his Instagram handle and has been
right,
ever since I've known it, that he existed. So I
right.
think
And
he's been working on this for a while.
he does talk a lot about, Wallace's idea of the definition of fun,
Oh yeah.
right? And like
Cool.
supposedly fun thing. It
Yeah.
sounds like it the most fun thing.
Sure.
Um, but Kyle, I think, is a super bright dude, and we'll have a lot to say about this because I I am really impressed by that book.
Hmm.
I
Cool.
love it.
I read the first 2 pages as soon as I got it in the mail, and it was about benches,
Yeah.
just like the concept of the bench, which for skateboarders is huge because that's an obstacle, like one of the most, standard skateboarding obstacles on which to do tricks.
Well,
Um,
I can't wait to hear what else you think about it because once you get to
yeah,
around page
I'm
30,
excited. Yeah.
you get into a lot of talking about skateboarding videos,
Oh yeah.
the
I've
history of
spent a fair
skateboarding
few
videos.
hours watching those in my day.
You would love to get the history of that, but then also him getting into, um, really just the culture of
Yeah.
what was it like growing up in the 1980s.
Mhm.
Um, the last book that I want to mention that I'm reading, it's on my nightstand. I just got this week is my buddy Daniel Oppenheimer, and he has a new book out right now called Far From Respectable. It's a nonfiction book about the art critic Dave Hickey. Do you know Dave Hickey?
I don't think so. It
He
doesn't
wrote
ring a
a
bell.
well, you should go read him. He wrote one of the greatest like books of art criticism ever called
Mm.
Air Guitar. Air
Okay.
Guitar. Um, and he was a Texan, partly. He lived in Nashville, lived in Vegas, but he identified with Texas for a long time, lived in Texas, and there's never been a biography of him. There's never been sort of a critical analysis of what Dave Hickey meant to
Okay.
the art world. And my buddy Dan, who lives here in Austin, just wrote this book, and it's fantastic. It's out right now from UT Press here in Austin. So if you have any interest at all in, I would say, contemporary art and art galleries, I'm sure you know Dave Hickey. And if you have any interest in Dave Hickey, go read Dan Oppenheimer's new book called Far From Respectable. which is really trying to say, like, does Dave Hickey matter now? What does he have to say to our generation? It's really a great book. It's
Cool.
very, very short too. Like, I love these
Mm.
books that are like an extended essay, right? It's like
Yeah.
an essay about this. I love books like that.
Mm.
So
Amazing.
that's where I'm
Cool.
at. That's where my head's at.
Yeah.
I probably got other things that could take me off track,
Sure.
but I was going to
But
ask
we're
you. I was going to ask you, Dave, like, before we go too, like, if you wanted to give any shout outs. Do you have any list of shout outs? People you want to give a shout out to?
we've covered a lot of them. Shout out to everyone who's hung in with us for 6 years, who shared their love of Wallace, of books, other adjacent interests. Shout out to this community that's sort of come around us and helped like make the show what it's become so far. We mentioned all of the moral support and emails and people who have like bought us beer and nachos and stuff. That's been really cool. Just like on a human level to connect with people who like, listen to what we do. To Robin, of course, to Parquet Courts, to Andrew Savage specifically. And I really am thankful for our friends Matt Luder and Mike Miley and Rob Short, who are all like really familiar names on the show, but like the five of us correspond quite frequently, and they've been a great sounding board for us over the years on ideas about the show, and you're probably going to hear lots from them and about them in the future of this show as well. And shout out to Matt Booker, my good
Oh,
friend who took a chance on trying, recording a conversation almost 6 years ago, and like here we are now, 6 years later, and so it's been a ride, buddy. Thanks for everything you've done for this community and for the show, and it's been a real fun time with you.
well, and thanks to Dave Laird too. I don't know if I've pointed this out on the show. I'm sure I have in the past, but Dave does all the editing for our show, and so I get to feel like the guy who just shows up and talks, and Dave does all the hard work. So thank you, Dave, for doing all the hard work over these
You're welcome.
5.5 years, and thanks for putting up with me being temperamental. And I wanted to give one special shout out to my buddy who I know through the Wallace world, created the infinite map, Bill
Oh yeah, Bill Butler.
Butler. And
Yeah.
he and his wife are celebrating a new baby this week.
Oh, congrats,
So
Bill. That's awesome.
It's a Bill Butler new generation Billy, their baby,
Oh, cute.
just born yesterday. So I wanted to
Oh
give him a
wow,
shout
that's
out.
cool.
Yeah,
Awesome.
so I'm going to give him a shout out. Again, a guy I've known for a long time through
Yeah.
Wallace World. And I feel like that's like most of the people I know,
Yeah.
outside of my neighborhood here, is people that I've met through this Wallace World. So
Yeah. Yeah.
that's not changing. That's still who I am. That's still my identity.
Yeah.
And I just want to give a shout out to everyone that I've got to meet up. I'm very proud of the number of people I've got to meet up with over the years.
Yeah.
It does sort of harken back to those old days where you could, everyone had a voice and you could actually listen to them and get to know them and reach out to them. So I like that, and I'm really proud of this little community we have here. So
Yeah, me too.
thank you to everyone who's listening, and everyone who has written into us.
And everyone who's been a guest on the show too. Huge
For
thanks
sure,
to every
for
person who's
sure.
done that.
It's been a huge task that we've asked them to do, and like we're going to make new stickers. Email me if you want a sticker. I have other stickers to send you. I got pencils, I got coasters, I got journals, I got stuff I can send to you. So like, Dave, do you remember for years I sent out bookmarks, those Pale King bookmarks?
Yep.
And I got people from years ago who would go back and listen to a show and be like, do you have any bookmarks? I finally ran out of those, but I do have I do have other things I can send you.
Cool.
So just email me, and like I love sending stuff through the mail and just writing to people, email me right back. And thank you for listening. And let us know too when you make your own show, because I think there are other people out there who want to make their own podcast, want to try it out.
Yeah.
Like,
George Salis, who he runs the Kaleidoscope and has been, we've had lots of interaction with him over the years. He posted recently that he's starting a literary podcast. So I'm excited to see what George comes up with.
there you go.
Yeah. So very
Again,
cool.
we need more
Spin-offs.
voices. So if you
Totally.
thought about trying it, I think there's another show, The Last Sisyphus. Give them a shout out. There's a lot of other shows that we can mention, but please make more. Send us links.
Yeah,
Let's keep in touch. This has been great.
totally. I hope that this news of like, us moving in a slightly different direction is not like disappointing for the audience. I hope it's exciting. Like really what we're just trying to do here, I think, is widen our scope a little bit and continue to bring, conversations about great writers and books that we love, and make a way for like new writers in the future to get a bit more press. I also think too, like, making a podcast about Wallace kind of has to assume that the listener has read at least, a few things by him, or, probably Infinite Jest. Like, I know people who are like personal friends who would be like, I'd like to listen to your podcast, Dave, but I'm never going to read Infinite Jest. Like, I just can't read a book like that big or whatever. So maybe like this will like lower the barrier to entry for our show a little bit. And it's you don't have to have read Infinite Jest to listen to it.
To our credit, we've never been an Infinite Jest show. We've
it's
never
true.
said,
Yeah, it's true. We've never been specifically about that, but it certainly wouldn't have hurt to, have read that book, because we tend to circle back to it a lot. And maybe it means like our personal friends, Matt, will like maybe listen to our podcast in the future. It's possible. I think maybe like 2 of my friends listen to this on a semi-consistent basis.
I like how you assume that I have personal friends. It's really generous of you, Dave.
Yeah, I'm a really generous guy, man.
It's really kind of you. No, I think we're trying to be the Terry Gross, right? The next fresh air. We can just interview everybody, but no, we do have a lot of interesting people in the pipeline.
Yeah, I think that, we do. We got some exciting stuff.
There's a lot of people that we want to talk to, and hit record and hope that you can listen in while you walk the dog, mow the yard, do the dishes, do something else with your life.
Drive. That's usually when I listen to podcasts.
Drive, for sure. Well, I don't have a commute anymore, but soon I will. But
sure, yeah.
we really just appreciate people spending time with us. Like, it's been, I don't want to sound too like over the top about it, but like when you put something out like this, you never know if you're going to get 2 downloads, and that's like you and your mom clicking on it. But we've been very lucky to get a good amount of people who want to be part of this, and so we want to keep it going. Well, we don't want to let you down.
Totally. And I'm still having fun talking to you every month.
Totally, man. This is, if nothing else, an excuse for me and you to hang out.
Yeah, exactly. Very specifically, I want to thank 2 new patrons, Riley Maxwell, who wrote into us and said like, hey, I kind of just discovered you late. I've listened to the entire show from the episode 1 to now in the last 6 months, which like, I haven't crunched the numbers, like 58 divided by 6.
It's a lot.
He's listening to like a lot of episodes. So thanks, Riley, for just binging. That's really cool that you spent a lot of your 2021 doing that. And we want to thank Matt Watson really specifically as well for joining, for supporting what we're doing in this very specific way. Every little bit helps us pay for our costs and mailing stuff out and new logos and all those things. And like it's really cool to like have that sort of community as well behind us. So we really appreciate it.
So more to come from Concavity Show. We have a couple of episodes that are already booked that are coming up, and I feel like we have a lot to talk about. So stay with us.
Yeah. We haven't talked about, we have a couple copies of Enter the Aardvark by Jessica Anthony that were sent to us by Bowen Dunnan, who's a listener who actually works at Little Brown. And Bowen sent us each a couple of copies of the paperback of Enter the Aardvark, which is Jessica's newest book, which we had her on a few episodes ago to discuss. We were thinking about contest ideas, but we never actually landed on how the contest would work.
I would say just email us if you want one. I have one. I also have a copy of a Greg Carlisle book called Nature's Nightmare,
Oh yeah, about Oblivion.
about Oblivion. If you want a copy of that, email me, and we'll try to just I don't know, pick randomly from whoever emails, if
That's a
anyone's
good
even
idea.
still listening.
Yeah.
Um,
How about this? We actually talked about doing one specifically Canadian
there you go.
draw. I'll send it. I'll send mine to the Canadian, and then one,
There you go.
American or otherwise. So if you live in Canada, email us. Mention you're Canadian specifically. We'll put your name in a hat, and we'll draw from all the Canadians, and then we'll do another hat from everyone else. And the one random lucky winner, we'll say maybe like 2 weeks after this episode launches, after the day it launches, email us in the next 2 weeks, and then we'll
So
do a
I
draw.
I will say also for runner-ups there, I might also have extra copies of issues number 1, 2, and 3 of our Journal of David Foster Wallace
Oh,
Study.
great. Cool.
And I might also have an extra copy of the DT Max book if anyone wants that. I long story, but I ended up with a box of them.
Oh,
So
did you?
I know he ain't listening right now, but I long story, I ended
Hey,
up with a
Dan,
box of them.
if you are.
uh, he's not. I'll go tell you. I talked to him the other day, right? I know he don't listen this far into the episode, but um, I have a couple of extra copies. I could send you one if you would want a book. Enter the Aardvark. That's number 1.
Yeah.
Number 2, the Greg Carlisle book. I've also got the DT Max book and the journals. So email us what you're interested in. We'll try to help you out.
Yeah. And huge thanks to Bowen Dunnan for reaching out to us about a lot of great books that he had recommended for us, and for sending us these copies. So rad. Yeah, I think that covers everything that we had.
Until next time,
Until
again,
next time.
watch this space. We'll be back with a new episode soon.
Catch me now as I say, into darkness I thought to be extinct.
Yeah, I have a few things that I've finished recently, and then a few things that I have in process right now.
Mhm.
Hang on a second. I'm going to get another drink. I'll be right back.
Sweet. What do you got now? Full dank. Evil dankster.
Fucking
That's
evil
amazing.
evil dankster.
Dankster. The word dank in relation to hazies is hilarious. I love it.
Yeah, Jordan's always like, are you smoking this or drinking it?
Yeah, totally.